Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. And for today, I have Erin Tusa Thatcher with me. Erin is an integrated holistic health and strength coach based in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. You guys, I said I was going to mess that up, but I think I got it. After her own 100-pound all-or-nothing weight loss roller coaster, Erin developed a holistic model for coaching and training to help people heal their relationships with food and exercise without needing more discipline and willpower. Erin works to empower her clients by teaching them that their eating and exercise issues actually have very little to do with the food and much more to do with how they physically and emotionally need to feel safe. Before we try to get into exactly what that means, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Love it if you could share some of your background because you had a journey that many of us share. And I think it would be helpful to kind of set the stage for sort of how you got to this work that you're doing now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure, both because I've been doing a little bit of research about the work that you're putting out in the world, and I just find it so needed and inspiring. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for having me on. And a little bit about me. So my name's Erin in Guelph, Ontario. In Canada. It's a weird name for sure, but it's
All right. Wait, we have to fill them in on the joke, right? Because I said I was going to really mess that up, you guys, but she schooled me on how to say it before. So phonetically, I have it written out. But so I think I did okay.
You did great. And that's like a physical safety signal right there. I was just really like breaking it down. Okay, this is how you say it. How do you feel with that? No, I love that. And I did grow up in Guelph. I grew up in sort of like a Christian home, I guess you would say. And I am the middle of three girls. And so for me, I always kind of struggled with my weight growing up and never really used to enjoy exercising or eating healthy because back then I really liked the thrill of being rebellious and going against the grain. And I was very I had concretized myself into that identity almost in a way when I was younger of like, I'm not the type of person who exercises. I'm not the type of person who enjoys healthy food. Like I'm rebellious. I'm the middle child. I'm the black sheep. And so that sort of framed how I started to view myself, view the world, view people around me, view my sisters. They were either better than me or worse than me, right? So it really started to frame this relationship that I had with myself and this all or nothing relationship that I had with exercise and food. Because I struggled so much with weight, and after being bullied a lot in middle school because of my weight, I started to feel different in a bad way. So at first, my rebelliousness was like a cry out, if you will, right? I was like, I'm not exercising. I'm not eating this way. I'm being my own person and screw you guys, right? But after a while, I kept getting bullied. I kept getting centered out. I kept getting just outcasted, and I felt different in a bad way. And I remember coming home from school every day after being bullied and binging on sugar in my pantry. I literally remember this to this day of being behind closed doors in my pantry, eating granola bars out of the package, like just going in on it. And it made no sense. And my sister would come home and say, stop eating. What's wrong with you? And I was like, I can't. It literally made no sense. So this cycle for me repeated on most days, and I had no idea what was going on. I remember that I learned from my peers and my family and the media and my religion a lot back then was that being healthy that definition that I held on to was pretty narrow. And skinny for me often meant that you would be in the popular crowd, or so I was starting to like understand that, right? Because I was bigger and I was bullied, I was outcasted. So my way to secure my belonging was, okay, if I lose weight, if I look a certain way, I'm going to be in with the popular crowd, or at least have a greater chance of being included. And I knew that I wanted to make a change, but I really did feel confused as to what's my next step here? Like, what do I do? I know I don't really like to exercise. I know that probably making some changes in my food and stuff like that would be helpful, but it just felt like such like a resistance, almost like a break, if that makes sense. And so I never really knew what diet to go on. So I tried them all, I was on it and then I was off of it. Paleo was the way, keto was the way. I tried them all. I never really knew what kind of exercise worked for me. And so I don't know if you guys remember curves. I don't know if curves was a big thing in the States, but in Canada, okay, cool. Yeah. In Canada, that was a huge thing. And so I tried curves, but I didn't get the results that I wanted from it. I tried it for a few months, didn't get any results, tried certain diets, few months, didn't get any results. And so it just felt very discouraging. It felt very like I wasn't able to actually progress in ways that made sense to me. And what made sense to me was the skinniness, right, that I was gunning for. And that was my only hope, So it just made sense how much of a backlash I kept getting from that, because I was only measuring that one thing. And so when I was 16, I tried out for Canadian Idol. And I got rejected because I didn't look the part. And this made me feel a shit ton worse, Marianne. It made me feel anxious. It confirmed that belief that I had in myself of like, yeah, I'm not going to get in with the popular crowd if I'm not looking a certain way or being a certain way or perceived as a certain way, right? And it really intensified my all or nothing relationship with food and exercise. And it was more fuel to the fire. And I remember my first attempt at trying to make a change, I couldn't stick with it. Like I said, I didn't get what I wanted from it. And I felt even more out of control with food and exercise. And now I realize that this actually reinforced as what I now know and what we work on in Soul Hunger and stuff like that with clients is my story that I came home, binged on sugar. It made no sense. I felt so less than, so shitty. And I kept avoiding exercise and I kept binge eating. And I later came to realize that this was actually my story. This was actually like those protective thoughts and judgments that I was having about what it meant to be skinny or what it meant to look a certain way was really keeping me in that all or nothing. So it really did stress me out. And eventually I moved out of my house where I also didn't feel like I belonged that much. And I still struggled with my weight. But I remember that I joined a gym in my early 20s in a women's only gym. And that was the first step to me starting to feel safe enough to work out and feel better in my body, was that women's only area. And so that eventually helped me to start to be more consistent. And that's that safety piece that we'll talk about as well, right? Because I was able to create that safety and that environment physically for myself. I was able to be more consistent. And then I started to associate that like feeling of aliveness that I had with training and moving my body to actually feeling good versus just looking a certain way, right? So I started to shift how I related to exercise. And that started to be a huge change for me. And I sought out a personal trainer. This is 10 years ago. Funny story is that now my personal trainer back then is now my husband. Yeah, we've gone on to start our own business together and work with clients who do struggle with their own bodies and their own self-doubt and their own body image. And fast forward to like 10 years now, it's really a big thing for me to start to help clients to start to see that the ways that we've been conditioned to believe what it means to be healthy or what it should look like or what we should strive for is actually a very small definition. And for example, a true story for me, Marianne, is on my wedding day. I remember going so hard with exercise leading up to my wedding because I was still in my story. I still wanted to feel better than, adequate, good enough. So I was really gunning for that up until my wedding day. And I remember on my wedding day, people looking at me and saying, "Oh my God, you look great, sweetie. You look great. What did you do?" but they had no idea that I could hardly even bend over and touch my toes because I herniated a disc in my back from such all or nothing, like intensive moments with exercise, and binging and being all or nothing made me feel so extreme with exercise and stuff like that too. So because I came from this background of like weight loss and self-sabotage a bit, but what we're going to talk about today is that me actually understanding that a lot of my self-sabotaging behaviors were actually not really self-sabotage at all. They were very, very, very protective of my nervous system that felt under threat, especially with my peers. And I think that that's a huge thing for clients and for us as well, right? Is like, if we feel like we don't belong in some way, we are going to double down, or we're going to try to figure out a way to feel that we belong and we're safe and stuff, right? So it's just so interesting because on my wedding day, I couldn't even bend over and touch my toes, but everyone was just like, oh my God, you look so great. What it took me to get to that point was very unhealthy. So it's just interesting that we don't see sometimes the whole like story is not necessarily what we see on the surface. You know, what's going on underneath the surface is a big motivator for us to actually want to make change and to do the things that we want to do for ourselves, right? And so, yeah, now I've done some post-secondary education and behavior change and facilitation because I really realized we kind of know what we know. We know eating certain ways and exercising and moving our bodies and all that kind of stuff are great. Sometimes we know what we need to do, but there is sometimes this protective resistance that comes in and steals the show, so to speak. And that essentially what Amy Johnson calls our brain is just what brains do. And I think it's a safety. It's if we feel unsafe, our amygdala, our brain, our body, our nervous system are going to feel threatened. And so we need to start to understand like, okay, maybe it isn't all about the food and the exercise. Maybe if I am feeling unsafe or at risk, and this is very much on a subconscious level too, right? It's not like I'm sitting here being, oh, today I feel very inadequate. And maybe we do feel that way, but then sometimes it's very much under the surface, which is driving our behavior. So now I love to help clients just understand that like health is so much more than what we give it credit for. And this holistic, bigger lens is so necessary, I feel, if we want to start to truly make a change and have it stick.
So you guys, I'm going to share with my audience that up front you said, I'm really passionate about this, so I could get carried away. So you're going to stop me if you want to.
That's me in a nutshell right there.
But I didn't because, well, I wanted you to give you a background story. And I'm so sorry that you went through all that. I feel like childhood can be wonderful, but can be awfully painful for many of us as well. I think we all come out of it with some wounds,
yes,
right? Obviously,
yes.
That's what carries us forward. I want to dig in a little bit because the tail end of all of what you were talking about, and you keep alluding to the safety, right? Feeling the need to feel safety and people needing to pull back into that versus doing the work. A lot of times what looks like trying to be consistent and make whatever change. And guys, just to make it more general, this doesn't have to be about food and weight loss. This could be about any change you're really trying to introduce into your life, right? If it feels new and it feels threatening. And when we say threatening, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm not educated with a degree on this, but I think what we mean is our brain has this behavior that it's used to, these patterns and these pathways that we travel down all the time. And when we try to do different things or introduce new habits or new concepts that we're going to start living around, it feels threatened because it's different. It's simply that it's different. And we're trying to introduce something that doesn't go with the story that we've been telling ourselves for a long time, right? That is what we're saying by it?
Yeah, for sure. It's different and change is uncomfortable. You know, as humans, I think it makes sense that we don't love uncertainty, right? Because it's unpredictable. And then if we can't predict and control things, that's scary, you know? So even when it comes to our weight and our bodies, they're unpredictable. Like then we go through menopause, you know, and then things change again. And then we have babies and things change again. And so oftentimes what we've been kind of conditioned to believe is that if we do X, Y, and Z, we are going to get the gold star. We are going to get the reward. We are going to get all that stuff. And that could be true. And sometimes it's not true. And sometimes it is uncertain and change is scary. So I think understanding that our brain is going to automatically be there to keep us feeling this sense of safety is just a natural mammalian primal thing. And I think with regards to food too, like food, a lot food and how we relate to food is about attachment, right? And we eat to feel grounded. And well, in my case specifically, I ate to feel safe and like I belong to myself when other people were telling me that I didn't belong, right? So this food piece is huge for safety. And I think it's interesting if we think about it, we turn to food to feel safe is like, whoa, it just almost relinquishes so much shame that can come from our decisions and our habits around food and stuff and how we choose for ourselves. Because it's like, I'm not choosing it because I'm being an asshole or here or something, right? I'm choosing it because it's just that protective strategy that I've been doing for so long.
And so when you start working with clients and you kind of bring them down this pathway of understanding, it's probably a pretty big shock, a new concept to a lot of people, I would think. And then once you get them on board, what do you do or how do you work with them to put mechanisms in place to kind of reinforce and keep that at bay, I guess I would say?
Oftentimes there is an external trigger that happens for the most part, right? Life happens, we go through life, things happen, things are annoying. And so oftentimes we get this external trigger. And this is kind of I call this our self-sabotage cycle or our bad habits feedback loop, right? Where it's just, we want to make the change and we understand that we're doing stuff like me, for example, I was doing stuff that didn't make sense for what I wanted to feel for myself, but there is this protective resistance. So when we think about this protective resistance, just zooming out a little bit, normally there's an external event that happens, but it's not always the external event that happens. It's actually what it dusts up in us. So it's oftentimes how we're making meaning out of, we're humans, we're meaning making machines, right? So it's oftentimes what's happened from our past, right, is getting reinterpreted in that moment for our safety, which I know you guys have talked about on this podcast before, which is amazing. And then oftentimes too, like our socialization and how we have been conditioned to view health, like I was talking about with my story of like, you're either, eating clean or you're binging on the couch and just watching Netflix and chilling, you're either hitting the gym every day or you're away on vacation, just letting loose, right? There's the way that we relate to our health and the ways that we've been socialized have been limiting in a way. And they really do put us into this protective binary, right? Of either I'm winning or I'm losing, I'm ahead and behind, I'm either avoiding or taking action, right? Or it's either their needs over mine, right? And so in Soul Hunger, we work on these three strategies, these three protective responses by looking at how we are relating to that external trigger and how are we protecting ourselves when that external trigger comes up. For example, for me, my story a lot, I talked about inadequacy being a huge trigger for me, but it wasn't just inadequacy to me is different than inadequacy to you, right? Like we feel it differently, So the way that I was feeling that was very much like isolating myself from any kind of belonging, And so when I feel that inadequacy trigger, or when I felt that way, I would either compete and try to lose a bunch of weight so that I did secure that safety and that belonging, right? Or I would build up my expectations in my to-do list and avoid everything as a result of not getting what I wanted out of that situation, right? So we work with these protective stress responses to start to see that, hey, I actually have some more options here, right? Like the brain that changes itself. I am not my thoughts. I am not, like this experience is happening. It's protective from what's happened in the past. And I'm recreating that now in some way to secure my safety in the future. So we start to really unpack like what's happened in the past that's made us start to relate to our bodies and our food and our weight in these ways. And how can we start to really understand that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be good or bad with our food, right? It doesn't have to be either or. But does that answer your question or no?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think it leads into another topic, and I'll let you answer it, and then maybe you can give an example of it, but you alluded to it. It's doing the work to help people understand and eliminate those inner dialogues, those voices. Again, lines right up with Dr. Amy Johnson's work, but those inner voices that sort of dictate to us the story. I'm going to say the story around the thoughts of who we are and in, what we're good at and what kind of person we are and all those things. But we both know, and so do many of these listeners, that those stories often hold us back, right? Because we're locked into them, or so we think, because we think that's who we are, right? And it's not true. So how do you do the work to help people unpack that? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, it's understanding that it's okay that you've chosen these things for yourself before in the past. Like, it's okay that you've coped, so to speak, with food or with over exercising like I did, right? It's okay to avoid certain things, right? These are all protective outputs of our nervous system feeling under threat in some way. And I think with food and stuff and our weight, it really does center around how we feel we belong. And I've noticed that in work that I've done with clients and stuff too, is like, if our belonging feels threatened in some way, and we are social creatures, we do need connection. And I think sometimes that interpretation of that connection or what we feel we need is often, like you said, becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, right? Where it's like, okay, I am this person. I keep relating to myself in this way. I keep choosing these things for myself, and it makes no complete sense. I think the first step is just building that awareness and understanding that the ways that you've protected yourself before in the past, like, makes total sense for you, And I think just starting to help clients understand that, like, their self-sabotage is actually very protective, very smart. It has its underpinnings, it has its roots, And I think it maybe is that we might not need to change it or like stop it, you know what I mean? Because that even in of itself is stressful versus like, how can I collaborate with these sides of myself if I've been protecting myself for so long and feeling that threat? And remember, this is very subconscious. Like, oftentimes I'm not going around, or I wasn't going around saying, oh my God, I feel so inadequate, I'm just going to stay at home. We would never get anything done that way, right? It's oftentimes I find with clients, the ruminating after a long day of work, or it's the transitions between work to home time that make things feel so overwhelming. But oftentimes it's how we've related to what's happened to us earlier in the day, what we've made that mean about us, which builds the threat and builds the intensity and builds the risk up. For example, that self-fulfilling prophecy for me was just like, okay, every time I go out and I'm in a heavier body, I feel more inadequate. I feel more inadequate, right? Like, it's like I'm reinforcing that feedback loop versus really starting to understand that when I felt inadequate, I would compete. So it's like, okay, I go into this compete mode, competing for resources, and then they're scarce, right? It's based off of scarcity. And so, like, if I'm able to understand and start to tell my nervous system and send signals of safety to my nervous system of, there's enough here, there's enough for me. What is enough for me? How can I start to really define that? And how am I leading in that integrity? How can I start to feel more in choice? What am I choosing today for myself that's going to make me feel like I'm actually getting to where I want to go? But I think, like I said, what happens is that our story puts the brakes on us actually taking those next steps because of how its impact it's had on us from the past and how we're bringing that with us into the present. What will replenish me here versus what I've been told is the right thing to do.
There's a lesson in there too. I mean, you and I touched on this when we had our touch base call before doing this session. And it's that we both agree that having a goal to lose weight or get healthier just for the sake of doing it, or that being the number on the scale, really, that being the only thing we care about, it's just really another form of chasing those external factors and trying to have them fulfill us or make us happy, when really we have to learn to be happy with who we are, redefine that in any way we feel is authentic to ourselves, and take a step back and stop chasing those things that we've been programmed. We've been programmed with all these external factors and all these stories that when we were growing up, and again, whether it's about weight or anything, right? It could be you're lazy or you're a bad singer, or your, right, whatever it is. And they're just stories we've been told, and we really need to just unbuckle ourselves from them. I don't know what, I was struggling to think of what the right word was, but to just detach ourselves from those stories. And I think really looking at Dr. Amy Johnson's work and kind of really getting my head around a thought is just a thought is so pivotal to me. Like knowing that you can have these things that have been really dictating your life, but really we could just say, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything, and redefine what's important to us.
Yeah. And I love how you say too that, yeah, like a thought is just a thought. These stories have been carried with us to enforce our identity. And, like it enforces our, our sense of safety and who we are and all this kind of stuff. Right. But it's like, well, a lot of the time, like if we want to make a change and it's not actually happening, which is a lot of the work that I love to do with clients, especially around exercise and food, is like, if I'm not making a change, what's really going on there? What am I making that mean about me if I'm not achieving a certain thing by a certain time? Or what protective thoughts and judgments like come up for me when I'm not X, Y, and Zing it as I've been told or programmed? Like you said, I love that. A lot of clients for me say like brainwashing in some ways, it's like it is. We have to do the work to unlearn. But I think Dr. Amy Johnson talks about this too, but it's like this subject-object theory, right? We are subjected to our story, but we're not objected to it. So it's a part of us, but it's not the whole piece, And so unattaching, like you said, or detaching, right? And starting to realize that like, okay, this has actually come from a very like safe and secure place, but now it's causing me friction, Me wanting to win and get ahead is like that caused a lot of back pain for me, like I literally wore myself out into the ground, and I'm not going to be lazy. I'm not going to be unproductive. I'm good at it, right? And it's like that pattern also fed into the all and the nothing piece of what that meant to feel moderate and what that meant to feel balanced for myself, So you're right. It's like, okay, these thoughts are there. They're just a thought. They are protective. And what do you want to choose?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Because you again, you hit on that. You alluded to it when you were talking before, and you said you try to get your clients, I'm going to paraphrase, but you said something like you try to get them to define what success is or what would make them happy. Where's that middle ground, right? And I think I can see why that's such a big step, because for many of us, it's all or nothing. And we never really stop to think, well, maybe I don't have to be that number, or maybe I don't have to go to the gym 7 days a week, or whatever it is, right? There are certainly going to be some non-negotiables in all of our lives, and that's okay. But we should consciously make a decision on what's enough, what is good enough, right? And where we can land and still create this life and this person that we want to be.
Oh, I love that. And I think this discernment piece of like, what is enough? Sometimes it's really hard to like even get clear on that because of all the, messaging coming at us and all this stuff, right? It's like, what's the middle ground? What's the message in the middle here? What is that discernment lens? And I think 3 things can really influence how we choose for ourselves with food and exercise. One can be our blood sugar. If our blood sugar and we're not eating the right foods for us in general, like we're going to crash into the evening. We're probably going to want to snack late night. We're probably right. So it's like, is this our blood sugar, right? Like it could be, you have no idea how many clients, like once we start to do experiments around like certain foods and like seeing how that shows up for them and how it changes their energy and their whatever, right? It's like, oh, the whole time I thought I was an emotional eater, when really I just wasn't eating the right foods for myself during the day. And that's a huge relief for a lot of people, And then second off, it's like, is there some leftover diet culture just stewing around here, right? Like if I have this cookie right now in the back of my head, am I been told that I can't have another one in certain regards, or if I want to get to the, so it's like, is there some sort of leftover diet culture that's trickling around in our brains when we're making choices for ourselves? And then the last piece is totally true, what you said. What's enough for me? That emotional safety of like, I know myself, I can trust, I'm discerning, I'm building that confidence, which we often project onto weight loss, which I know is a huge thing that you guys talk about in your community too. The process of what we go through as we're trying to lose weight literally changes us, or it can at least, as a person too, right? So it's like we think all these things are going to come from losing weight, but it's actually like the process of losing weight and feeling good while we're doing it, really feeling like aligned with what our choices are that actually gives us the confidence, right? Like it's crazy to think. It's so cool. It's so cool.
I mean, right. Because it's the mind work, right? It really is the mind work. Change your thought and you'll change your life. And I think that is so true. A thing that's coming to mind, and I've often referred to her because I'm just such a super fan, is Elizabeth Benton. I don't know if you know her work. She's written Chasing Cupcakes and Tools for the Trenches. She's phenomenal. But one of the things she often says, I mean, she says a lot of wonderful things, but she often says, what else can be true? What other perspective can you have? And that's for me, such an easy thing to think of. When you are telling yourself one of these stories that you're the fat kid, or you're the kid that doesn't belong, or nobody wants to be your friend, or whatever the scenario, like, well, is that the whole story? What else can be true, right? And then if you just start asking yourself some questions, and she's phenomenal at putting questions out there, but if you just start asking yourself some questions that are like on a pursuit of discovery, you're doing research, just kind of be objective about it, I think you get really clear about a lot of things.
Oh, that's so great. Oh, I love that you say that. That's like the moving from what Carol Dweck calls like the fixed mindset into like the growth mindset, right? It's like, how can I get curious? What can I learn about this that I didn't know about myself before? Like, and that in and of itself is those questions of curiosity, or those coaching questions and all that stuff. That is sending a signal of safety to our nervous system, like emotionally, psychologically. This isn't make or break. This doesn't have to be the be all and end all, right? It's like, what else can I learn here that I didn't know about myself before that will give me more information to take my next step, versus like, I ate the sourdough. I ate 5 sourdough slices last night, like I'm screwed, or, whatever it is. Right. So anyways, I just find that that's really very, very powerful, of that questioning of curiosity. Like you're saying, is like, it can literally change who we are if we're able to soften and get curious.
Yeah. I think it opens the door, right? It opens the door to learning. And then to your point, the confidence doesn't come from, I don't know, a number on the scale, or getting to the goal of whatever it was that you set your mind to be. I mean, it could be getting a degree in college. I don't really care what we're talking about. The confidence doesn't come from landing there. The confidence is going to come from all the steps you took along the way, all the things you learned and did along the way that got you there. That's what does it.
Yeah. And I know it to be true for me is because I've got down to my goal weight before, and I still, I could barely move. So it's like that, what I projected onto weight loss then for myself didn't give me ultimately what I thought it would give me. Having this chance to go back almost and do it differently is like, I can actually be the one in the driver's seat here, like I can choose to show up for myself every day. And part of me and my healing from my story, and that's what we do in Soul Hunger, is like, okay, we're not subjected. How do we want to choose? How do we want to rewrite this, like, so that we can start to gain some clarity? For me, anytime that recognition or that fear of recognition is coming up is going to play with my story, because when I was 16 and got rejected from Canadian Idol, like I didn't get recognized there, right? And then it means my singing career is over. I mean, in my head, it felt that way, right? And so it's so all or nothing, right? Versus now I'm actually getting to like choose for myself every day how I want to be recognized and the work that I want to put out there, versus like, do they like me, versus like, do I like them for once? Like playing with those questions and starting to develop that sense of agency and authority, like self-authoring our own narrative is so key. But the only way we can do that, like you said, is to first get curious about like what's actually going on under the surface. What is coming up externally? What does that bring up in me? And how am I competing, avoiding, and accommodating to keep myself safe? Like I had a client who was like so all about her artwork, right? And she is very much like an artist, and she wants to put her artwork out in the world and all this kind of stuff, right? And she was really stuck in the avoid pattern herself. She would build up the effort that needed to start putting her art out and to showing off her voice in the world and stuff. And then, so because that was such, for her, that self-doubt was a huge like trigger as well. So when she wanted to actually put her art out in the world and she wanted to make a difference and start doing things that she was actually really passionate about, that protective resistance would come through and be like, don't what's the point? No one really wants to hear from you, you know, versus like, whew, let's just zoom out a bit. This isn't make or break, right? What's the next step? How can we start to build that efficacy up slowly? And then we started to really expand. And that's what we do in Soul Hunger, is that we actually like experiment and we get clear and we start to understand like what we are measuring versus what we've been socialized to measure is the good or bad thing, right? So it's just cool to see that like these protective patterns, like I talk about competing, avoiding, or accommodating, are there for a reason, and they all provide their own unique growth. And this comes out of Thomas Kilmann conflict model and the work of Dr. Thomas Kilmann, but basically like that post-traumatic growth opportunity that's in our protective resistance. Like there's a layer there that we can learn from, like you said. So it's just, yeah, it's very cool to see that like we aren't our thoughts and they're there for a reason. And can we get support to start to shift that narrative and stuff, right? It's hard. It's so hard. It was hard for me. That's why I keep saying it's hard. Yeah.
Well, I say that too. I agree with you. I think it's hard. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And I think it's not a direct path, right? There's like the saying about dancing or something. It's like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, or it's that dance you play with it, right? Because I think you make progress. You can even go down this path of, you know, digging in. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to do the mindset stuff. I'm going to get really clear and kind of dig into these deep spots where we never dug into for years. And you feel like, oh, I'm really starting to get this. I really understand these things. And then, like you said, life happens. Life is messy. It's one of the premises of my whole show, right? And then it sets you back. It sets you back again. And that's okay, I think. I think that's just how it works. And you just got to get back up and try again. And that setback typically teaches you something about how you need to go forward again. It's just not a direct path.
I love that. Yeah. And like, how are we defining setback? You know, how have you defined a setback earlier in your life? Like I would have defined a setback as the world's ending, myself at least, you know, right? Yeah. Versus like, maybe there's no such thing as a setback. Yeah. Like, how would I show up for myself? If there were no right or wrong choice here, how would I choose, you know? So like, once we can start to really like, and this is the safety piece too, is like that embodied, like oftentimes I feel like we're in our heads trying to, like, you know, figure things out and negotiate, but oftentimes we do need to learn how to get in our bodies. And that is that physical safety stuff that we really work on, of like what helps me to feel just at least a little bit more comfortable right now, you know? And so, yeah, we work on those skill sets, but like you said, it's hard. Life sets us back, or life happens. That's uncomfortable. And oftentimes it's what we make it mean about us that makes it so uncomfortable. And so if we can start to make it mean something different and experience that, Dr. Keegan and Dr. Lisa Leahy, who are like the founders of the Immunity to Change framework and are basically like 2 Harvard researchers coming in the industry right now on the up and coming, talking about how we have sometimes this immunity to change, like what I'm talking about, almost like this resistance to change. And Dr. Keegan says that we oftentimes have to, I always get this wrong, we have to feel our way into new, different types of thinking. And we have to think our way into new, different types of feeling. So basically, I need to start feeling differently. Like I shared with my experience with exercise, I need to start feeling differently about what exercise gave back to me. I need to start feeling differently about how I'm eating and how that's affecting my blood sugar and my energy throughout the day. Like I have to start to experience that, if that makes sense, because I can't tell you what to do. Oftentimes, like you have to be the one to start to really realize, oh, this makes an immediate quick fix change in my relationship, in my job. Like it has to serve my bigger purpose, right? So really getting clear and having some structure, give me a bit of structure, something to follow through with. It helped me a lot in my weight loss journey, you know? So they're not good or bad, they're tools. And I guess it's like right tool at the right time.
Yeah, right tool at the right time and not taken to the extreme, right? One all or nothing, not taken to the extreme.
This safety piece is so key. And like our body trying to protect us, like our body automatically tries to protect us, and we have to like collaborate with it so that it doesn't feel at risk or as at risk, so that we can actually start to feel good with the changes that we're making. And if we have a setback, you're right, maybe that setback doesn't exist anymore if we stay true to our own process, or whatever that may look like, you know.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to share all your links and all the ways to get in touch with you.
I just want to like leave maybe your audience with like the premise or the thought that you're not alone. Even if you think you're still working on it, it feels like you're not maybe making as much headway as you want to. You're not alone. It's very protective. Like, it makes total sense. And like, just because it's there now doesn't necessarily mean it won't shift and change, right? So just staying true to your course is the key.
Oh, that was a lovely last thought. Thank you for that.
Thanks,
you for
that. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.